Hello and welcome to Fall Through, your source for deep conversations about technology, software, and computing. I'm your host, Chris Brando, also known as Scriptable. And today we have another duo episode. It is Jamie and myself, and we are going to be talking about the wonderful world of open source, what's been happening in the news recently, including that big TANstack hack that happened, along with some stuff with Composer on GitHub with Actions. It just seems like GitHub Actions are having a day, having a time, having a week, having a month, does anybody really like GitHub Actions? We'll get into all of that. As per usual, we will have supporter-only content. If you are not a supporter, you should definitely become one by going to fallthrough.fm/subscribe. And if you're not following us on social media, please give us a follow there. We love interacting with you guys on our posts. And if you're on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And with that, let's get into the show. Hello, viewer/listener. Welcome back to Fall Through. Open source. You know, it's always something going on in the land of open source. The number of hacks that have happened recently is kind of crazy. Like before we started recording, we talked about the TANstack hack and how Syntax, the podcast, Syntax FM, had a coverage of it. And they had all of these puns at the beginning of their episode. And they were all puns on different people who had vulnerabilities of some sort or been compromised in some sort over the last, I think, few weeks. And there were like 5 or 6 of them. It definitely seems like the speed or the rate of vulnerabilities is increasing. And I don't know if it's the rate of vulnerabilities or at least the rate at which we're hearing of them. Either way, feels like something is happening. But it all starts with GitHub Actions. We had a couple of these vulnerabilities with GitHub Actions. So, Jamie, do you want to do a dive into, nice little explainer dive into TANstack, but also GitHub Actions, and what are they for our listeners who might not be using them?
The TANstack start hack was, as you say, very common to a lot of recent issues. As with a lot of them, it started on GitHub Actions. It was leveraging an attack vector that is as expected, and like GitHub do not want to fix it. They're like, it's fine. It's a very insecure way of running it, but it is part of the platform, so let's leave that there, which we'll talk about more in a sec. And then it went through to, yes, we're now able to publish dangerous versions of our software. And then in an interesting angle, there were some different mechanisms for the malware itself to retain access to the humans that they were infected by. So it started by a GitHub action using the pull request target workflow type, which is something that for literal years people have been campaigning for GitHub to get rid of. The reason for that is it executes in the context of the forked repo. So it allows someone on their fork to potentially introduce malicious code that then GitHub Actions will run. And not just like, it just runs that. It also runs with access to secrets and a few other things that can be utilized. In this specific case, it wasn't an access to a secret that they used. It was that they poisoned the cache on the GitHub Actions runner. So again, due to the way that pull request target works and the way that caches are then shared, someone was able to create a draft PR, I think it was, with pull request target running. They were able to put some malware into the PNPM store, then close their PR, everything was fine. Then once a completely valid PR from someone else was merged, their poisoned cache was then utilized on their main branch, and that then allowed the attacker's code to start executing, at which point it was able to use the OpenID Connect OIDC token to then start publishing malicious versions. So in this case, like, the malicious actor didn't even need to get anything into the code base. All they needed to do was raise a PR that did not get merged, and they could pwn everyone. And then, like from there, one of the interesting things about the malware was it utilized a dead man switch. So if anyone had installed a malicious version of the package, what would happen is it would then install things like systemd user service and a cron job to periodically check every 60 seconds, is the GitHub token I've got access to still valid? And if it is, that's fine. If it is revoked, for instance, someone realizes they've been compromised and they revoke their token, I am going to delete your hard drive. And there's a fun new way, not something we've seen in a while, of a destructive dead man switch. So, yeah.
Yeah, though that part of it where it goes and just RMRFs. I don't know if was it your whole drive or just your home directory. Some covered said
maybe just your home directory.
Either way, catastrophic. Yeah. So like that is messing it up. But the fact that like it wasn't just a compromise too, I think is like the important thing. It was a worm compromise, which means it just spread, right? So it like got into Tanstack, and then it, if you downloaded it, it would grab all of your keys, and then it would try to get itself into other repos, and then keep spreading and spreading and spreading. And in addition to installing this dead man switch, I think it was both in systemd and in launchd. So didn't matter if you're on Mac OS or Linux. If that key got rotated or that token got rotated, it would try and delete your drive or delete your home directory, which is just such an insane thing to do. I mean, your worm's already successful if it winds up on someone's machine, but it would just try and like grab environment variables and secrets and all of that and just send them to a remote server. Then that server could go.
Yeah. And as we've seen before, like trying to get access to other secrets is a great way of being able to compromise more things, but it's also a way of getting free compute. Like if you have AWS credentials, if you've got your Claude API keys, now someone can go and burn through a load of tokens to do other nefarious things, whether on your machine or otherwise. Yeah,
it would also it would also install itself basically as like a Claude code hook. And I think a Codex, like their version of hooks as well. So every time you started up Claude Code, it would just reinstall itself. So it would put itself in a whole bunch of different places to try and make it so that it was persistent and so that it could just steal all of your stuff, which I think really opens up a big question about like how much trust we actually give the software that we're downloading access to a computer. How much access does that thing have? And like we've been maximizing on convenience for a bit too long. So if you can install like a systemd service or a launchd service, like most people don't even understand especially on macOS, like what a launchd service is, or like that they can just be like user added, right? And macOS is pretty good if it's something that runs in the background. It will pop up a little notification that says, hey, this thing's been installed. So I think for some people, if they saw that pop up, they might have been like, oh, that's not correct, and uninstall it. I think like Claude, because I remember I was like doing something and Claude wanted to install a launchd service because it wrote one for me, and it tried to be like, I think Claude's own security model didn't allow Claude to activate it, but a shell script can do whatever it wants, so it could easily activate this sort of thing. So it's a good idea in general to check your launchd services or your systemd user services to make sure there's nothing weird in there. But yeah, it's also interesting that this is like a worm that we've in a series of worms, all named after, I guess, the Dune, a worm in Dune, the series.
Yeah, the Shai-Hulud.
Yeah, the nerdery is just very deep on this one. But it is I think concerning that we are in a situation where a compromise of this type, right? GitHub having this thing, it's weird to call it. It is a hack, right? It is a vulnerability, but it's something that like GitHub's like, it's a feature, not a bug, right? It's a feature, not a security violation. When it like I I think it clearly is a security violation if you can poison a cache. I think that's something that shouldn't be happening. But I was thinking about it, and I'm like, how do you prevent poisoning of the cache unless you make it like read like write once only, like write once? And it's like, okay, but in that case, then like it's just like, I don't think there's a good way to make it so that this isn't a problem with the way things are set up. It seems like the cache should be bifurcated between like trusted and untrusted, and that's probably a fix maybe they'll put in place, but it doesn't seem like they're interested in doing this.
To guess specifically on the cache, I'll try and dig up the link. I know GitHub are in particular looking exactly at this around how do they stop cache poisoning in this very specific example. I saw a post about this a couple of weeks ago, so like they know it's a thing, and something to be aware of. And it is like one of those things that I think, yes, it may be okay. Well, maybe PRs don't get access to the cache at all. So PR builds are slower, but then once you're on a branch on the repo, you're safer. But then also, if you're on a branch and you can poison, say, the main branch's cache, that's bad. Because then it just means someone with write access to the repo can then attack it. So then you just focus on people who have access to the repo, of which there will be often quite a few people who can do that.
Right.
Yeah, so that's a difficult one.
This whole stack of relying on GitHub for so much stuff. Like, I don't mind, like, it's one of those things where I don't mind GitHub trying to add new features for things or add new products like they have over the years. But it seems like all of like each of the products that they have is like a worse-ish version of something somebody else was already doing. And like I feel like if you're going to pull like an AWS here, or like an Amazon, then you should make it like a better version of that thing. And I don't think that's like what's really happening or hasn't been happening even like for many years with GitHub. Like I've like PRs we've talked about before, I've found always to be terrible. Issues have always been like a not great way to discuss things. Discussions are like slightly better, but not great. I think GitHub Actions have always seemed a bit janky. Like the whole "will be one platform to rule them all" thing, I think has not been a very good track record for GitHub over time. I think that's one of the reasons probably why it's having struggles or has had struggles, is because, like, you know, as the changelog folks used to say, you know, you got to keep the main thing, and I do not think they kept the main thing. It's just like, I don't know, did you need to get yourself into this compute mess with GitHub runners? It's like the whole reason you have a cache is because you're trying to save on like download costs and having to do all this extra stuff. But it's like, okay, well, that's not secure. Like, if you're not going to figure out how to like prevent cache poisoning, and like that's a really hard engineering problem, especially at the scale of like for languages like JavaScript or Node or whatever we're calling, I guess, backend JavaScript, but like tens of thousands of packages sometimes for even a simple app. It's like a truly absurd amount of stuff that you're downloading each time. So I get why you want to have a cache, but you have to make that thing as trusted as the upstream, and that's really hard to do. And it's like, okay, well, maybe this isn't an area that you should enter into if we're not going to be able to like properly secure it, or like make it a weaker product, right? Don't make it a more secure product because you need to make it a more secure product, and like walk more carefully. Like I think an example of this that I think like a lot of people are a bit angry about is with Threads, right? The Meta Twitter knockoff. They introduced support for connecting with the Fediverse, right? So you can enable something, and then any like Mastodon account or whatever can pull your threads and all of that. So there's integration. I remember seeing some coverage of this with Waveform, which is MKBHD's podcast, and they had like somebody high up at Meta, I don't remember exactly who it was, but they were kind of asking like, oh, why don't you just turn this on for everybody? And they were like, well, when you're like a big company like we are, anything you do can draw the eyes of regulators. So you have to be very careful and think very deeply about like, is this the expected thing? Is this going to be surprising to users? And that's basically why they're like, okay, we're going to like lock this down and give users lots of warnings. And like, if you know what you're doing, kind of just click through them. But if you don't, it's got to look like a little bit scary so that it's not just like, oh, all of my data is flowing out to like some other Mastodon servers out there and I didn't know. And now I'm mad and some regulatory agency comes and like yells at them. Which is like kind of the cost of regulating things in the way we do, is that, you know, people are going to move a bit slower to avoid getting sued or having to go through the process of being audited or whatever. But like they had to make a very intentional decision to make the product, I think, like less competitive, because I think it would have been more competitive if it was like everybody on Threads, like they had full Fediverse integration. I think it would have been a very different story than what it is, but they just couldn't because of the, you know, the environment that they sit in. I don't think that's kind of the like approach that GitHub needed to take here. Is that, you know, with things like this, you have to think of like, what is the like ecosystem wide problems that might occur if this product is not as solid as it needs to be. And it's like very popular open source libraries getting pwned and causing like a big problem. This is going to be a big problem for a while, because like a sophisticated worm is definitely going to find its way. It's going to be out there for quite some time before we find ways to like clean it up safely and all of that. It's a mess. It's a giant mess. Yep. And it could have been avoided if this product didn't have this kind of giant hole in it. And the fact that the giant hole's been known about for so many years is like, okay, well, it was just sitting there waiting to get exploited. That is not great.
And so 2 things following on from that. So the first one is that GitHub are now building even more stuff on top of actions. So things like Copilot reviews, and there's something else which is using actions as the engine for running. I think partially because they're like, well, we have generic compute, let's use it. That's fair. It simplifies billing as well, because then they can bill customers for action usage. So like Copilot reviews are now part of your action minutes, which is now like, oh, but they used to be a separate thing, and now I'm burning way more minutes. That's frustrating. But the other thing is that, so last week I was at the GitHub Maintainer Summit. There are a number of things that I cannot talk about, which I'm annoyed about. I really appreciate being invited, but there were a couple of sessions where they were like, do not share anything from this, including to like my co-maintainers. So anyone who's not on the call cannot get any information, which is fair. Like there was a lot of very interesting private information they shared with a level of trust, so that's nice. But in one of the other sessions, there were discussions about things like pull request target as an inherently insecure mechanism for doing things. And the commentary was like, well, we're going to break too many people if we change it. I was like, yeah, but if you are like the primary attack vector, it's a significant foot gun that enough people are doing it wrong. And like there are cases where you have to use pull request target. So for instance, like if you want to label a PR or an issue when it's created, or a PR when it's created, you have to use pull request target because it has to run in the context of that fork. So you have to be careful when you're using it, to know when you're using it right, to not do anything else in the workflow. And it's like things like this should be protected. And yes, it will be a break and change, but that, because like there is so much going wrong out there, so many people who are vulnerable because of it. As a platform, they should make that choice to say, you know what, we know we're going to get some flack for this, but it's much less flack than yet another 3 dozen open source projects this week being attacked, and untold damage on the wider ecosystem because of this. So,
I find it interesting because it's like these platforms that we have, it feels like so much of these problems are built on unoriginal sins. I think in the case of GitHub specifically, right?
And something interesting that I think conceptually I knew about this. It wasn't until recently it properly clicked. So there are various versions of GitHub. There's GitHub.com, there's GitHub Enterprise Server, but there's also a thing called GitHub Enterprise Cloud, which until recently I was miscategorizing as you have enterprise paid access to GitHub.com, whereas GitHub Enterprise Cloud is we will run GitHub Enterprise Server for you on the cloud. And I do wonder if maybe some organizations will move towards that. So I don't know if it will be, well, I assume it will be significantly more expensive than being on GitHub.com with Enterprise. But if you can then completely separate all the compute issues and everything to a whole other set of infrastructure, that may be quite nice for a lot of these big enterprises who are finding being on GitHub.com is quite painful. That being said, like you're still going to have to interact with other repos that are on GitHub.com.
Yeah.
So if there are 504s coming back, you're still stuffed.
Yeah.
But yeah, it may bring some things about. And yeah, we are seeing more. Sorry, you go.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, and like we are seeing more people vocally moving from GitHub. It's still going to take some time, and I don't know if a lot of the big enterprises will do that. But for instance, friend of the pod, Steve, as we talked about in the last episode, I think, the new platform is getting ready. It's in private preview. It is available for people to start playing around with. And I do wonder if availability of things like this will start nudging people out of GitHub.com into alternatives.
Yeah, I think there's like enough smaller ones too. Like I always bring up Source Hut, but there's GitLab, which is like, oh, I want GitHub, but not GitHub. But yeah, there's things like Source Hut and obviously like Garrett Hub and other places where you can go for like just hosting your code or just doing part of your workflow, which I kind of think is what a lot of us want anyway. Like, I don't know, the one-stop shop for all of my Git needs or all of my really workflow needs, I think is just not great. I don't think it's what we want to do anymore because it has so many, like, a vulnerability does just have such huge repercussions, or like outages, or like, them having their version of a product not being as good as outside versions of a product, right? Like it does feel like we're all kind of stuck with GitHub issues simply because people host their repositories in GitHub, and you will get like issues flowing in, even though like plenty of open source projects could have already built their own issue trackers that would have been better. Like the fact that Go still is using the GitHub issue tracker for most discussions and conversation. Well, I guess there's GitHub discussions too that are used, but I still think most people open up an issue, and then most things are like proposals are mostly discussed on issues, even though sometimes they move to a discussion and then move back to an issue. It's just very confusing. And it's one of those things like, I don't know, Google built an entire Git platform for all of their open source stuff, right? When you don't commit, you don't put pull request out to contribute to Go. You go to Go's Garrett, and then you can push up patches, and then get reviewed there, and then get merged in and synced to GitHub. And it's like, originally, Go did not use GitHub issues. Like there was a big migration that happened in the early-ish days of Go. So it's like we didn't used to all use this thing, but we all kind of moved to it because it was kind of like one of those, that's where the people are. But I do think more platforms needed to go build out their own like issue queue. But the problem is also like I don't think you can, now you can, but I don't think you could before turn the issues off, right?
Yeah.
So, or effectively couldn't, because even you could turn issues off, people could still make pull requests, right? So it's just like, and people just make a pull request to make an issue and then be like, why didn't you answer me? So I think like that aspect of it, and I think there was some weird integration where if you tried to like create an issue, it would like bump you over to your own issue tracker. Like there was that integration, but again, there were still people that would just open up a pull request instead because they didn't want to go off platform. So there were like those types of things that like kept people in the platform. But I think that like there probably should have been a bigger push from these, especially these larger open source things that had effectively moved themselves off Git for Git operations to also move themselves off the platform for things like issues and other stuff, and just be able to use it as like a here's a thing, but really be over here, please.
And I guess it is an interesting one because there is that balance of friction between how much friction are you introducing before people just will not contribute.
Right.
And it's the sort of thing, so like for instance with Renovate, I think as I've mentioned before, we use GitHub discussions as our triage point. And there is an unfortunate rise in the number of issues that people are raising through issues. Despite us having a big warning when you go and try and raise an issue to be like, don't do this. People will still like raise it via the API. And then we'll auto close it, move them to discussions. But even like that level of friction does reduce the number of people who report actual valid bugs to us. If that's available as a platform, like integrated into the platform, if you're then like, oh, okay, I now need to go to this other thing. Do I now need to sign up for an account? Oh, come on. I don't want yet another thing having my email address, having another secure password. And yes, you can get around it with things like sign in with GitHub. And for instance, like the so for GitLab itself, they've got a discussion forum, I think powered by Discourse, and that has login with GitLab. So you don't need to set anything else up. You log in with your gitlab.com, and it just works. But it is still that little bit of extra friction. And for some projects, you want a little bit more friction. Like you want to introduce a little bit to stop the little crappy drive-by comments or things that aren't really issues and are more of a question or a thing, while also being like you don't want to have so much friction that people just do not bother. Because that's also a way you just lose out on everything. And maybe like for now, Go as a language could do that. Because they actually have a lot of people. There will be people who will probably go out of their way to go and log into another thing to feedback. But especially for like fledgling projects, you probably want to reduce that friction as much as possible to build up enough of a community to then be able to switch. Or yes, you do it right at the beginning, and then anyone who joins the project in the community already know that that friction is there and they're happy with that.
Yeah, I think like I guess this brings in like a broader problem I have is like the monopolization that people seem to want to have with these platforms, where it's just like GitHub could fix a lot of these issues if they saw their role as stewards of like source code and open source in the world, instead of just like, we are a company that needs to make money. And it's like, okay, yeah, you are a company that needs to make money, but like most people I think aren't paying you anything. And like I don't think like the reasons that people pay for GitHub, especially now, right? Especially now that after they were acquired by Microsoft and now like their plans are like so cheap, is for like, I want private repos or whatever, which I think is like, yeah, no, that's a reasonable, like that makes sense to me as why you want somebody to pay for something. That's like, and then for the open source stuff, you would like to be like the hub where people can find open source projects. But you should also enable the success of those projects by making it so it's like, oh yeah, we have a version of this thing, but if you want to contribute, here's how you contribute, and like linking off their platform for that. I still think people would find things via GitHub, even if the contribution mechanism is not GitHub, right? Like Go has never been a programming language that you can contribute to on GitHub, right? It has always been through the old system and now through Garrett, right? So you have to go to Garrett if you want to contribute a patch or whatever. it feels like more native integration with those off-platform contribution models. Like that feels like it would make me use GitHub more, not less, right? If it was like, oh, I can just go to GitHub for whatever project, and now I know I will be able to get to their issue tracker. I won't have to like use Google to go find it. I will be able to get to their contribution system. I won't have to like scrap around or read some docs to get there, right? If they were just the hub and they were like the marketplace, we'd go out and find the other stuff instead of trying to build all of this themselves. I think they would wind up with a much leaner product that's much more easier to monetize. And we wouldn't be in so many of the situations, but they tried to be like the everything platform. And I think that's part of the reason why it's like has so many holes in it, because trying to maintain the everything platform is really difficult, right? Trying to maintain like a high quality code contribution system or high quality forge and a high quality issue tracker and a high quality discussion system and a high quality compute platform. Like those are separate, very, very large companies on their own. And like, I don't think GitHub has ever had the resources to really tackle these things in the way people expect a GitHub platform to tackle them. Ironically, it does remind me of Meta, where Meta has so many products like that they are not integrated well, and it's very difficult to use their platform effectively. Like I was trying to set up like Meta Business Suite over the past weekend, and like it was like, even though I have an Instagram account, I only had an Instagram account for fall through. I did not have a Facebook account because you having a Facebook account for something like this, they want you to have it be like an actual person, and then you have pages and you got to link it with your personal. It's like this whole mess. But like the Meta Business Suite assumes that you have a Facebook account. They're like everything. You can technically log in with Instagram. You can technically do things with Instagram accounts, but they are basically no Facebook account, and that's it. Even though they've done all that work to try and like unify their auth system and all this, it's just like it's a very messy platform because they tried to do all of the things, and like they've only half integrated things together. And I'm like, this is just a gross mess. Whereas like if you could have just kept these things separate, right? Like you could have just. And one of the reasons why you want to move to something like Meta Business Suite is like for Instagram, you can't schedule posts on Instagram. If you want to schedule a post, you have to go to Meta Business Suite. But also because Instagram just kind of shoved in there, you can't do things like tag collaborators inside of Meta Business Suite, or really even within like the Buffer. I use Buffer for our social posts. You also can't tag collaborators in there. You have to go onto Instagram. And you have to tag them in Instagram, or you have to add them as collaborators in Instagram. So it's like the platform's like a big mess of like sprawling features, and like it doesn't quite do what I need it to do for the social media stuff I want to do. And like I feel like GitHub is the same thing, but for our code, where it's like, okay, I would like to be able to go there and have all of these pieces fit together well for me, but they just don't feel like they fit together well at the end of the day, right? Even just if you look at issues and discussions, it's kind of difficult to like separate those two out as to like which should I use for which, and like why are these two separate things. And like the fact that GitHub issues don't have like reply threads, I think is part of the problem, because like Slack solved this issue years ago by adding replies. And like that has mostly, I think, solved the problem having a single linear discussion where you're like, okay, what part of the conversation was this thing? And people having to use like block quotes to be like, oh, I'm replying to this thing. It's like, it's easier if you just have replies. And scaling replies is difficult. Just look at Reddit. But like that seems like it would have been a better thing than discussions. Because whenever I go to use discussions, I'm like, this is very foreign looking. Like this is not like issues. It looks very different from issues. It's a bit harder to track the conversation, I think, inside of discussions. It's easier to track an individual conversation. I think it's harder to track like the conversation as a whole as a result. So it's like you built this completely separate thing when I think maybe what people wanted was like some modifications to issues. So it feels like it has that sort of same friction that I've been experiencing with like Meta products, where it's like this stuff feels like it should be seamlessly integrated because you're the same company, but it's clear that these are different product teams and different people that are like trying to integrate with each other, and it's just not it doesn't feel like it's really working. And I feel like that itself produces a lot of friction, I think, for contributing to open source, whether it's actual code contributions or like raising an issue or opening raising an issue or opening a discussion or even just sending a pull request in. Like the way that templates work is not great. That's not how if I'm a maintainer of a project, I don't want just some template that someone could blow away and try to submit. I want something a bit more structured, which would be nice, but like that's just not there. And like, why is that not a feature that you built in, right? You built this whole discussion thing, but you did not build a way to like systematically collect information from people who open issues, which seems like a base level thing that most projects want. Like, please tell me the version of the thing you're running. Please tell me this. Like, give me the log of like, give me the information, please, so we can get started right away. Or be like, this is a different type of issue, and then I can know in my triage and I can separate these two things out without having to build weird tooling or have to do some weird labeling system, right? It's like they are not focusing on the main thing, and they're kind of all over the place. And like for a small startup, okay, fine, whatever. You're exploring things, you're trying things. But for like a massive enterprise inside of a multi-trillion-dollar company, that does not. I don't know if they're a multi-trillion-dollar company, but at least like a cent-a-billion $1 billion company. It seems like that should be something that they should be more on top of than they are.
I think that's fair. How much have you used GitLab out of interest?
I've used it more. I used it for a bit in the past. So I started working at a place that was using GitLab a lot. I did not like GitLab. It felt very much like a knockoff version of GitHub, and I in that phase I did not like GitHub that much. So GitLab was not something I like. I imagine I would think they've changed a lot in recent years, but my experience with them has been like, you are just like GitHub and have the same problems as GitHub. Like, you call them merge requests instead of pull requests, but it's still the same fundamental issue at the end of the day.
Yeah, so the reason I ask is, so like for over a decade, which is woof, I've been using GitLab as my primary platform. And originally it was, they allowed me to have unlimited private repos because GitHub didn't all those years ago.
Right.
You had like a maximum of 2, I think, and then you had to pay. And I really liked GitLab as a platform. I do agree it is, very much similar in offering some things less good, some things better. And like I've been using that for all of my personal projects for years. But all of my primary big open source projects have been on GitHub because that's where they started. So makes sense to stay there. But one of the interesting things is like you're calling GitHub the everything platform, which I think shows you maybe haven't used GitLab as much recently, because you can manage your Kubernetes clusters in GitLab. You can do things like feature flagging. And so GitLab itself pitches itself as the one platform you need. And maybe not necessarily fully managing your clusters, but it's things like connecting your clusters so you can auto-deploy every project through there. Managing feature flags in GitLab so then you can actually operate your production stuff from the repo that makes sense. There's things like that where like if you think GitHub has a lot of features, GitLab's throwing more into it. And yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. I don't like that at all. The fact that we as an industry, we are the Unix philosophy industry. We are like let's have well-scoped programs that do a few things well, right? But that's and then you put the things together. And now we've gone to the like, here's one giant solution for all of your problems. I don't think that ever works. I don't think the big monolith, like small m monolith, like I don't think that works well for us as an industry. I get why people want to do it, but like I find it, it's interesting because I think the reason why I don't like the fact that GitLab is trying to do all of this stuff, and why I don't like that GitHub is trying to do all of this stuff, is because this is very much behavior of like the social media platforms, right? We want our walled garden. We're not going to integrate with other people that provide things that we see as competitors, or if there is something that somebody else provides, we're going to try and integrate directly into our platform instead of just making it so we can integrate with them, which just is like inherently hostile to the idea of open source, I think, and the idea of like being open and connected, right? Like once again, GitHub should be the hub, or like GitLab should be like a hub for how you connect to other things, not trying to be the everything for our people and their projects. So I think like scaling a company to actually be able to build all of this stuff and be able to manage that well and make products that are actually good is very challenging to do. But if you have that feature in your platform, people will use it over going and using something else, because especially in an enterprise environment, because it will always be, well, why do I want to have to go pay another contract? Why do I want to have to go do another thing when the thing that we have already does it? So then you have to make a big argument about why you should go use this other platform instead of using the thing that's built in. And it causes all of this. And once again, I get why like companies do this, but it's like really gross behavior at the end of the day. And for people that kind of are pitching themselves as like, we are the champions of like, we're trying to help open source, we're trying to do all this. It's like, then why are you be doing things like this? Right. And I get like, there are businesses at the end of the day too, but it's just behavior that I associate more with the walled garden folks, not with people that are trying to champion, open source or be like an alternative to the open source thing, which I feel like it's what I've always associated GitLab with, but that's also an old understanding of GitLab. So I can see how maybe GitLab itself has changed over time to kind of not be that thing and be more of a business instead.
Yeah. And just on the topic of GitLab, I haven't read anything about this, so I can't talk too much about it. But I know in literally the last couple of days, they've announced that they're doing some corporate restructuring for the Agentic age. But one of the minimal things that I've seen about it is they are trying to do it, like with everything, in the most transparent manner they can, which hopefully will be good for the employees. Like, so at the end of the day, you may be losing your job, but at least you have had a bit more insight into it and input.
Right.
Which, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that works.
Yeah, I guess this is like the thing we've talked about many times on the podcast, which is just the like open source kind of requires a different sort of business model.
And I was talking to my parents the other day, and we were talking about AI, because there was a recent thing that Hannah Fry did, where she set up OpenClaw, gave access to WhatsApp and stuff, and it ended up blackmailing her. And it's like, this is not great. And I talked to my parents saying about things like anti-terrorism, and the fact that models don't like teach you how to make napalm. So people get around it being like, my grandmother's just passed away. She used to sing me a song when I used to go to sleep. Because you do that because I'm having a really hard time. It was the recipe for napalm, and it would get around it. And it's like there are inventive ways that you can get around a lot of the restrictions. The sandboxing isn't quite as strong and as solid as we hope it is. And we are letting these things rampant across lots of things. Let alone like the regular damage that humans can do. Now you have things that can operate at a much faster speed. and like there was another thread during the GitHub Maintainer Summit talking about like, or maybe it was an episode of Fall Through recently, but someone was talking about the fact that like GitHub was designed back when there was actual friction for a human to go in and raise an issue and raise a PR. Like it took you time to go and check out a project and make a PR. Whereas now, like you don't have to do anything. You just tell a bot to go and do something and it will.
Right.
And like yesterday I had someone on the Renovate project who was submitting their first PR, so they needed to sign the corporate CLA or the copyright license agreement for the project. And they were saying, oh, I'm having issues, like it's throwing 401s. And so I was like, are you a human? because they had generated a chunk of their PR with AI because they had attribution. And I was like, is this an agent just trying to sign the CLA? Is there an actual human here?
Right.
And both they and I explained, like, it is wild that we have to have this conversation. Like, I have to think, is there actually a human at the end of this?
Yeah.
Or am I talking to someone who does not respect my time enough to reply to the message themselves? In this case, it was a real human. But there are lots of cases where there are people who are just sending their robots out to do things and wasting other people's time without wasting any of theirs. Like at most, it's some tokens to them. But to me, like it's my day. Like I'm spending valuable time with limited keystrokes left in this world. And yeah, for what?
Yeah, I think the thing that AI like has really done in ways that past movements could have done, right? Like I think cryptocurrency could have been very disruptive to our concepts of money and how money works.
Ooh, have I got a lot of thoughts about that?
Yeah, that was a standard Kris rant.
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of one of the last things you mentioned.
Okay.
And in particular around AI and open source and rewriting all the things. And, I don't need to depend on a library. And so in November, I wrote a blog post about this, naturally. And one of the key things is that, one of the first things I'll caveat this with is technically I get paid by people depending on open source and other dependencies. Like my job is literally supporting that. So I will caveat that there is an inherent bias there. But also it's the sort of thing like, if more people start doing this and say open source generally dries up, where does all the training data come from? If you don't have all these open source projects solving the problems publicly, none of the model providers can train on the new ways of solving the problems. So then they're going to have to start stealing people's private data, which generally people aren't going to be as happy with. The other one is that fixing things generally for the public good is better.
Yeah.
And like having the thing, which I don't think you disagree with. But it's the sort of thing that frustrates me when I see people being like, oh, well, I could just rewrite this project and make it just work for me. And it's like, yes, you could. You could do just that. What about when there is a gnarly bug that we can solve in a central way that then you don't have to go and spend the time doing? What about when you have a vulnerability? But like even if you fork a project, you probably won't get notified that there's a vulnerability because you're now not using the upstream project. So there's that as a thing. But then there's also, if you rewrite the project, you potentially will still have that vulnerability in there. You just won't know now. So it's even harder to find that there is an issue there. And so it's the sort of thing that I agree that there is definitely something that should be done to try and nudge towards, like, is this a project that I want people to depend on versus, is this something that I want to be a hobby project and I do not want all the fame and dependency graphs to depend on me versus do I want this to actually be something viable? And one of the problems there is like there is no machine parsable way of saying that.
Right.
And things change over time. Like one of the projects I maintain, OAPI CodeGen, I haven't had a lot of time to work on it recently. There's been a lot of life happen stuff. And whereas in previous months, I was getting paid for it, I was doing a lot of work towards it. And like these sorts of things are in flux. And some of it is still in my free time that I'm getting paid to do that. And actually, it should be in my working hours. Or like generally, people working on open source, in my opinion, should have the option of being paid for it, to the point that it's part-time or full-time work, especially for projects that are depended on by so many people. And one of the problems is like companies don't give a fuck. And sorry for the second bleep, but literally like they don't care. And this is going to be a good segue in a second. But it's the sort of thing like, so OAPI CodeGen, one of the things that we've been blocked by is supporting OpenAPI 3.1. Now, OpenAPI 3.1 came out just over 5 years ago. Why do we still not have support? And that is a question that people are constantly asking. And it's that OpenAPI 3.1 is a significantly massive change, and potentially could have been classed as a major version. And the library that we depend on for OpenAPI support, Kin OpenAPI, is maintained by an even further overstressed and overburdened maintainer, who just hasn't had the time to be able to sit down and do it because it is a lot of work. And so fortunately, like in the last month, Pierre Upstream has worked with a contributor heavily using AI to add the support needed to at least get that preliminary support to then unblock others in the ecosystem. But one of the things is that several months ago, a company who I won't mention, you'll be able to find out from the issue tracker, a company came on and was like, hey, we've forked our OAPI CodeGen, we support OpenAPI 3.1, come and use it, like tell us what it's like, look at how great we are. And like one of the great things of open source is that is absolutely a thing that you can do. And I do recommend people doing and voting with their feet and proving that they can do the work and show maybe they could be a new blessed fork. But interestingly, when you actually went to look at the features that they implemented, they'd stripped out most of the code from the project to support the specific use cases they had. And it's a thing of, well, yes, it is a lot harder to maintain a project that has to deal with all the different things. And that is the burden of me as an upstream maintainer. Like, we have that burden. And yes, if you come in and say, well, actually, I'm going to rewrite it or I'm going to strip it back, I'm going to grab just the modules that I need, then yes, you can make it more maintainable. And it is a very difficult thing. And it is one of those things that there are some maintainers that are finding it easier to work with AI. So for instance, my co-maintainer, Marcin, has recently done a lot of work on the project with a lot of help from Claude Opus. And that has helped unblock a lot of work because he has been able to send out many opuses. Opusi? What would be the plural of? In a similar vein to Corey Gwynn, would it be,
no, that'd be first.
Claude's opus, maybe?
Well, it's not. Yeah. Opus instances. There you go.
But yeah, like being able to send them out and do different things and multiply the size of the maintainer team. But at the same time, we've got very, very large companies depending on us. Why can't they help out with that? Why can't they give us some money towards that, some time,
I think actually your argument here cuts in favor of what I was trying to describe. And I think because I was just in the middle of a monologue, I didn't really elaborate on what I meant by write it yourself. Because it's like, the thing about it, I think in the past has been like, either you go grab this open source library and you use it and you spend some time figuring out how to integrate it, and then you spend some money, but it's not seen as money because it's just engineer labor, and engineers have a tendency to devalue their labor a bit by working far too many hours and doing too much for free for their companies. So they would go and they'd be like, okay, well, here you go. Like, I'm going to use this library and integrate it. Or maybe I can write this thing myself. Maybe I only need a small part of it, so maybe I'll try and rewrite it myself, but then you have this trade-off. But like, all of this is happening, and it does not show up on the company's books. Like, it might show up later when you slip a ship deadline because you spent too much time trying to integrate with this open source library, do something, but like, it's not something that is apparent to people in a way that is trackable. Right? Even like re-implementing something here, that is not something that shows up as like a direct cost. It shows up as, oh, we have to spend 2 extra weeks on this project. But there's a lot of reasons why you might spend 2 extra weeks on a project, right? It's not like, oh, there's a direct cost. With LLMs, though, if I say, LLM, please go rewrite this library, because so many enterprise plans have switched to token per million pricing, right, for tokens, API-based, consumption-based, it's going to crank that out in probably hours for me, and it might cost $3,000 to do it. But that $3,000 now is an expense that the business can see. So now all of a sudden, something that before was an invisible expense, right? It's not something I saw myself paying for because it was rolled into the salary of engineers. Now that's a real on-paper amount of money I spent. And if you do that, now all of a sudden the trade-off isn't some engineer's time. Now it's, actual dollars. Like, if I can just give this project $200 to keep it going, and now I don't have to spend $10,000 building and maintaining an alternative, that's a trade-off that most companies would do, right? You put it in terms of the language that companies speak in, which currently open source is outside of. And like, that's the problem, right? Companies don't contribute back to open source because the people who are in charge of giving out the money do not see that thing is actually being used, right? It has to be an engineer going to their management, going to leadership and saying, hey, I use this project. It underpins your company. We should contribute to it. But there's also, any company, a ton of projects that they're using and all of this. And it's like, how much do I give to each project? How much is this project worth to us versus how much is that project worth to us? How much is this one, right? How do I actually get money to these people? Is there an easy way to get money? Like, all of those are like up in the air questions that are not solved, but it's something that would be solved if all of a sudden it comes as hey, we will spend 2 billion less tokens per month if we just depend on this library instead of maintaining our own fork, right? Like, or hey, we will not spend, 1 billion tokens if we just use this open source project and contribute $500 to it instead of building it ourselves, right? So like, by having people start rewriting things using AI specifically, using LLMs, that becomes a surfaceable cost. I mean, it's very easy for this to get lost and it to be like, well, but once again, once it's a surfaceable cost, all of a sudden, if you're blowing up, if you have a $10,000 a month bill per engineer, you're going to start asking, what are all of these tokens going toward? You're going to want engineers to start doing more accounting of their usage of tokens, or start actually maybe generally classifying their tokens, because now you're spending quite a bit of money. And it becomes a method for companies to start actually having a way of seeing these things actually save us money. We should pay to save money. And they can't do that right now. And the current status quo does not allow them to do it, which is why so many companies do this, because it's like if I fork the project to make it, I can get some good PR around it, right? Because people will know that you forked it and you added this feature. They don't know all the stuff that you just talked about, because people probably aren't going to go use that thing. They're probably going to go still use the upstream thing, right? So there's like the actual, like, I guess in some ways, political machinery of open source needs to shift. And one of the ways it should shift is by, in my argument, by actually having people generate more things internally. Also think in ecosystems like JavaScript, it would it would behoove us to start generating some of these really small packages just with LLMs and try and figure out how we get out of the situation where you're downloading tens or hundreds of thousands of dependencies. Because it is insane when I go and download a Node.js, or even Python is starting to get like this too. When I download this project and there's just this huge list of dependencies, and then I go to some Go thing that I'm using, and it's like 20, even full transitive, right? There's such a smaller attack surface, right? And part of the reason there's a giant attack surface is because, like, well, I'm just going to depend on this small little thing instead of re-implementing it. We're like, oh, well, we don't want to re-implement it. And yes, there are many, many, many open source things that you should not re-implement because they're riddled with tough edge cases. Like, you should not go build your own hypervisor. You should not even go build like curl yourself. But there's a lot of stuff that people depend on libraries for that it's like, you could probably build that because you only need a small corner of it. I'm
sorry, I disagree with that. I don't know how to implement is odd without depending on is even and negating it. Those are common packages used in the NPM ecosystem, is odd and is even.
Yeah,
there was a sarcastic response. I agree that there are a number of things that we shouldn't be re-implementing and should be trying to limit usage of.
Yeah, I think too, like, platforms are important. Like, I think one of the issues with the front-end world, which some of the, Wes and some of the other folks on Syntax have brought this up, is like, there was a period of time in 2009 where, or like in the mid-aughts, when like, yeah, you really did need to use a framework. Like, you needed to use jQuery if you wanted to build interactive web apps, because trying to use the platform itself was truly awful. And I think there was a brief period of time where like React and the virtual DOM and JSX and all of that, it was also like really necessary because that's how you did components and didn't just have div soup everywhere. But like, the platform moved forward, and it has so many really nice features built into it that even the platforms kind of lag behind, or some of the frameworks lag behind sometimes. And it's like, getting people to just use the platform has been really difficult because they're in these ecosystems with these frameworks. So like, it can actually make it harder for things to move forward if we depend too heavily on, say, especially big open source projects, the ones that actually do get the funding, because like they're basically trying to build a platform on top of a platform, and they're trying to serve everybody, and they cannot serve everybody. And I think like ultimately this is a very big balancing act. Like, there is not a version of our world where like open source just goes away. I do not think that will happen, even with all of the LLMs in the world, for the reason I mentioned, right? Like, companies are not going to want to spend 20 grand to re-implement some open source library that they can get, well, right now for free, but could also just be convinced to pay $1,000 for, right? They're not going to do that. So we're going to continue having open source projects, but I think we need to be better at prioritizing the resources that we have and really bifurcating this is like a commercial, not-for-profit endeavor, and this is a joy project. And I think that joy projects should, if a company comes and depends on it, that's fine. But it should be very clear that if like a company wants something added to that or wants to move it out of a joy project, that needs to be an explicit move that the maintainer also acknowledges and opts into. So I think what happens is that people make projects for joy because it's fun, because they're interested in implementing something. They make a very good implementation of it, and then people start depending on it, and then they feel an obligation to help those people, right? It happens very slowly. They start issues. Oh, I'll fix that. Oh, I'll fix that. And all of a sudden, now you're buried in work. And there was no point at which we weren't and said, hey, actually, people should be paying for this now. This is no longer just a joy project, because this is no longer bringing me enough joy. But we know we don't have a language to talk about that yet. So it's a problem on both sides. Both the maintainers themselves don't realize that they're getting out of a joy economy into a what's the word I'm looking for? Into a capitalist economy, right? They don't realize they've made that transition. They're no longer about joy. Now it's about time and money. And the companies don't realize that they've gone from, this thing is a little thing for free that's maintained by someone for their own joy, and we're not putting any pressure on them by just consuming it, to, I need things from you now. I need to pay for that, right? So we're missing transitional points. And I think LLMs are a way for us to surface the need to create those transitional points within companies, right? If we, as an open source community, we're like, if you want to start filing issues, you need to start paying in some respect. I don't know how that works, because that would also probably quash a lot of people filing bugs on things. But again, if it's a project for joy, doesn't matter if it's like if you're getting fewer issues in. Do you even want to get issues in? I think there's a lot of nuance here that needs to be developed out, and people need to be able to set their own boundaries around things. And we just don't have any of that, because I think we think of open source as a big monolithic thing. It's like there is the open source developer, and it's like, well, there's a very big difference between someone like you who is paid to do open source and someone who just made a little hobby project because they really like a specific thing. And so it's like we need to be able to differentiate those two groups of people and support them as they need to get supported, and there needs to be clear boundaries, because like the current system is just like, I don't think the current system is working. I don't think any of us think the current system is working. And this is where I come back to the whole idea of like, we should be using LLMs to help us solve these problems instead of the position right now, I think, which is a lot of people are worried that like, oh, if the LLM is writing code that open source maintainers can write, that's a bad thing. I guess I just don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as a step toward a better world for everybody. It could potentially be a bad thing, but I just don't think with the way the economics are working that it will probably become a bad thing or practically become a bad thing. We'll see. There's a chance. I just think it's a low chance that it'll become a bad thing. I think the more likely situation that will happen is that things get better for all of us as a result of it.
I hope so. I know, like, I think I feel this where people who have at least had one popular open source library or package or dependency, whatever, they will then realize for whatever they do next, oh, actually, I'm going to make myself a little bit clearer here. I'm going to say it's a joy project, or it is a, if you want features, pay me. Like, otherwise, I'm not doing them. And being a little bit clearer with the contract there, because also, like, people are excited to do open source, and not necessarily even just like the joy side of things, but being like, people are actually using this thing that I made. That's awesome. And like, I want to do things and I want to help, and I want to be valuable. And then the burnout hits them, and the reality of, oh yeah, you have half the ecosystem depending on you. Why haven't you fixed that CVE yet? It's only been 30 seconds. You've been hit by a supply chain attack because you didn't know that you're using some insecure stuff because you didn't have 300 of the tools that will tell you this. And yeah, it's a difficult one. And I think also, like, Mike McQuaid this week of Homebrew fame has created a website called the Open Source Resistance. And I want to talk about this as well because I very strongly agree with this. And the key thing that Mike's trying to get across is that instead of begging your company to like let you have a little bit of time to contribute back to open source, just do it. Now, big asterisk there of check your contract, understand your rights and legalities of what you're doing. Be careful, be intelligent with what you're contributing. But it's the sort of thing that there are a lot of companies that just do not give back. And especially in cases where, like, if you're saying, like, it's hard to integrate because there's this issue, you could go and fix that. Or if you notice something, you could try and fix it. Or at least do some investigation so then the maintainer who picks it up, or the contributor who picks it up, can actually go from there to do something. And I think putting some of this onto the engineers to make that decision themselves is good because in a lot of companies it's a default no. That may be for legal blah 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 reasons. But in a lot of cases it's just, we're too busy, so do it in your own time. It's like, well, it's blocking us doing this work, or it's like causing a production issue. So do we just wait for however long for a maintainer to pick it up? Probably not. Or are you expecting me to do this in my free time? So you're now getting a load of free unpaid labor from me and a maintainer who's then going to review it and fix it and release it. And then at some point we'll update to it and fix everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do agree with like I think a good interim fix is like if you're able to just commit code and the company is not going to like come after you, like you should do it. I also think like there's probably a lot more space for you to suggest a fix and maybe a design for it without actually the code, and then like the maintainer can like run an LLM against that and basically produce a patch that they can use, right? Like I think there's space for that sort of stuff. But again, I think like the main problem here is that companies do not have, like, we as engineers, I don't think make a good enough argument to companies about why they need to care about this, outside of just the, it's a supply chain risk to not do this, or it's like because if you do not properly quantify and define the risk, a business does not know how to deal with it. So you have to bring it to like, basically, I think engineers need to start bringing things to the business in business terms. Like we have historically, like this is one of the interesting things that got surfaced when I wrote an article about waterfall for changelog. Like historically, we have always been the self-centered jerks of companies, where we just think we're these special little children that get to do whatever we want, and everybody should abide by how we see the world. And like that's not how it's ever worked. So when I think your frustration is definitely somewhat with the companies, but I think it's more with engineers at these companies that are not able to talk and speak in terms of the business, right? Because if you make the business case that if you sit down and be like, here's the risk of us not contributing this thing, here's the amount of time we'll lose, here's how that translates into money, here's how it could translate into market position loss, here's how, like, if you start actually constructing an argument in the terms that businesses use to communicate, it would be they'll be able to make a much more nuanced decision, or at least have a much more nuanced conversation. Where I think a lot of the times, at least in my experience, when people brought up open source, even if there are champions of it high up in leadership, it's very difficult for someone to argue if they can't give the whole story and what a business expects, right? And I think a lot of engineers just don't get near any of this stuff because they don't think they need to, or they don't want to. But that, I think, at the end of the day, is what's leading to these issues where companies just like don't give back to open source because they don't have the ways of actually surfacing it, right? And like if you just go to a lawyer and like, hey, can I give away some of the company's code? They're going to be like, legal's going to be like, no, that makes our lives more difficult to figure out, well, what could have you given away? Should we have given it away? Should that have been more be an internal thing? Blah, blah, blah. Like we have to actually think about all of the other people that work at the company and all of the other departments that they are, what concerns they're going to have, how we build frameworks so that we can actually, have a discussion about this and decide whether we can do this thing or not. Because the default's going to be no. Because basically what you're asking is like, hey, I would like to do this thing. I think it's important from my standpoint, but I have not really thought about your perspective on this, right? I mean, even just from legal's perspective, right? Lawyers are not jerks. I mean, some people say they don't have souls, but they are not mean people, but they are in trying to make their lives easier. They are trying to protect the company from like lawsuits, and they are trying to make it so that, because I think to a lawyer, what's the difference between if you're just like, I want to contribute to an open source project, well, what is it that you want to contribute? Like some small thing that doesn't really matter, or like some important part of intellectual property for our company? How do I know that you're doing one and not the other? How do we set up the controls to make sure that you're doing one and not the other? Where's the line that we draw? How do we decide what that line is? Like, I think when people do open source proposals, that's not the conversation that they want to have or are having. And that's certainly not the thing I think most people give in an initial proposal is like, I want to contribute, and maybe they do it for a one-off project because they really want to contribute, but we're not building frameworks for how to have these discussions and how to decide what's fine, what's not, what needs permission, what doesn't need permission. And that's the type of system that you need to really develop if you want more engineers and had to be able to contribute to open source on company time, and for it to be a more normalized thing. So like, I agree on the one hand with like, yes, we should, if you can, just contribute, but that's not a fix to this larger problem. It's a band-aid, right? It stops the bleeding. It doesn't fix the broken bone. We need to fix the broken bones. We need to fix the system that keeps breaking our bones, is probably a better analog here, right? Like if you keep breaking your arm, we should probably figure out what you're doing that's causing you to have a broken arm and prevent the broken arm in the first place, right? So we have a problem with being able to support open source maintainers and help them not get burned out and give them more resources. We can't fix that on a project by project basis. We have to fix that at the company level and then at the industry level, where like we come up with general rules. Like we did this with licensing, right? Like companies very well can say they, like, do not use GPL code. Definitely do not use AJPL code in our company. Hardline, very easy to know. This is what it is. You can use MIT, you can use Apache, you can use BSD. These are licenses of code you can pull into. You cannot pull into these codes. Like we've made it very easy for both legal departments, for everybody to say, this is what you can use, this is what you can't use. That's the same sort of framework that we need for when you can contribute, when you can't contribute, when we'll contribute cash versus when we'll contribute your time. Like we need a way to make that a tractable, quick decision instead of it being a one-off. I have to put together this whole immense amount of stuff to convince all these people to do it. And then the next time I want to do it, I have to do it again. Because then once again, you're spending more engineer time, you're spending resources. So it's like, I think part of the problem here is that we have not been willing to understand that there is a lot of like the same amount of complexity and nuance that we deal with in our code bases and all those on a daily basis, everybody else also has, and their jobs are not super simple, and there's a lot of things that they have to consider and think about. And until we actually recognize that, until really we recognize that we are not the main character in their story, I don't think we're going to fix this problem. Right, you have to recognize that they are the main character in their story and you are a secondary character. And if you're going to ask them for something, you have to make sure that you would ask it for them in the way that you want someone to ask you for something in your story, right? Engineers, once again, software engineers always want people to go make things easier for them. It's like, okay, well, that's fine if you expect that, but other people also expect that of you. And you should not be angry or upset when you have to do that work because that's the work that you demand of others.
That is fair. But also at the same time, I just want to push a fix. Like, why does that have to be so hard? And not really answering your question, but for instance, in my first job, I was at Capital One. And in the UK, we're like a small credit card business. To go back to one of the first things we talked about. So one of the things, well, no. Not quite the first. But when we were talking about actually, was that pre-call we talked about FSNotify?
That was pre-call.
Yeah, sorry. So we were talking about potential maintainer attacks and issues with the FSNotify project in Go. And one of the things they were doing was clearing up a load of old access that people had to the organization because it increases chance for different attacks. And right. I've literally just been kicked out of an organization that I was added to many years ago because I think they are also doing some cleanup, which is very fair. Yeah. Recently, I was actually thinking I should probably just leave that organization because I don't need the access ball. It's done now.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, the FSNotify thing is like interesting because it's like, oh yeah, this is like sometimes things can look suspicious even when they're not really that suspicious. Like it's like, yeah, no, we should clean up access on a lot of the stuff. I also realized I don't think we talked about the Composer GitHub token thing. No. Want to do a quick summary of that?
Yeah. So it was a security advisory that the Composer project has reported. Composer, for those that don't know, is the package manager for PHP, or one of the package managers for PHP.
It's technically one of, but basically the.
Yeah. And for those that haven't seen, there's been a recent change on the way that the GitHub token is generated on GitHub Actions. This is part of general changes that GitHub are doing around improving performance and reliability of the platform. And one of the things they've done is they've started embedding some additional metadata in the access token that is provided, including a JSON web token, a JOT. And one of the things with that is that composers would do some validation of authentication tokens that is provided. And if it is not the correct format, it would log it out in full. And so there were these cases, and the fix they were introducing was because if you were using Composer in, say, a GitHub pipeline, you would pass in the new format of the GitHub token. It would therefore not match their validation because it now includes a hyphen in there. And then the full GitHub token would be output to the console. And therefore, anyone with read access to your CI would be able to see the token and use it for the next 59 odd minutes. And especially in cases where you have tokens with like write access to pull requests, that then means that people can start doing funky stuff. So this was not ideal. It's one of those things that GitHub didn't really give too much heads up that this was coming. I remember seeing it like a few days before it landed. Where GitHub were like, "Oh, by the way, we're making this change. Hope you don't have any hard-coded validation." And I think it does also come down to how much should we be validating some of these things in terms of formats? Because an opaque token should be opaque. But how opaque do you want to treat it? Like, how much validation and formatting checks should you be doing? Some of these things can help people catch issues if you've added like spaces or invalid characters. But at the same time, you also... Sorry, there's an alarm going off somewhere. At the same time, like, the more you add or apply some level of rules onto a token that is meant to be opaque and you shouldn't attribute any value to it, is just going to make it harder for other people to make changes, like in this case.
Right. Yeah. I think, too, that's probably the token should probably only be alive for the run of the CI and then should be invalidated, but that's probably a much harder problem to solve. But it's, or you do, I think it's Amazon, I think, where if you're just like on a VM, you can just access the API because like the VM does the authentication whatever, instead of trying to do like a token of some sort. Like, I think there's definitely part of this is definitely the way that permissions work in CI is probably not, once again, like it's a tough problem to solve. One that really is like a whole company's worth of effort, I think, at the end of the day, to really solve it well. So,
and also, like, especially CI platforms, you are literally giving people remote code execution as a service. So people will try very hard to do what they can to exfiltrate not only this secret, but anything else they can find. And because you are literally giving them effectively a shell to run whatever they want in it, people can try lots of different things and do what they can to try and get the dangerous stuff. Yeah.
I think this is definitely like we need better workflows. We need to rethink. I mean, I think that's what I think is going to happen in the industry, is that we're going to really rethink a lot of these things and we're going to come with better things. And people like, East River Source Control will work on different types of forges. And I think there'll be more forges out there that approach things differently. I think there'll be more CI platforms that approach things differently. I do think that this will become a problem that we figure out how to solve. It's just that in the interim, there's going to be, I think we're in for a rough next few years trying to solve all of these problems. Because again, like, the game just changed with LLMs. Like, we are able to produce way more, like a single human can produce way more than they could before, which is good and bad all at the same time. All right. Any last thoughts before we close it out?
So many things on the list that I didn't even get to talk about.
That's how it always is, Jamie. You put together this big list and then it's like, I mean, we could go for another hour, but I have editing to do, so we cannot go for another hour.
Let's call it that. That's good.
Okay. Well, thank you again for joining and having more. I feel like you can be like our OSS correspondent or OSS co-host. Because it's always great being able to talk about all this stuff and having the insight of someone who's like in this every single day. It's really nice. Yeah, and viewer/listener, how'd you like this episode? We talked about a lot of stuff. I think we talked about everything that I said we were going to talk about in the intro. I know I've been bad about like, there's always like one thing that we forget to talk about, but I think we got all of them this time. But yeah, what do you think about this conversation? Do you agree with us? I mean, I had some I guess mildly spicy takes in there about how we should approach LLMs and how, you know, we should maybe turn some of the stuff into like fiscal visibility for companies. Well, what do you think? Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? How do you feel about all of these like vulnerabilities that we've been dealing with, all these compromises? Let us know in Change.Zulip, Gopher Slack, on our social media, or anywhere you find your wonderful Fall Through host or co-host. This episode of Fall Through was hosted by Chris Brando with co-host Jamie Tanna. This episode of Fall Through was produced by Chris Brando and Jamie Tanna, and our beats are by Breakmaster Cylinder. Huzzah!
Yeah.